Sunday afternoon at 1:46 Eastern Time, Joe Biden released a letter on Twitter. "My fellow Americans," it began, "over the past 3.5 years, we have made great progress as a nation." It detailed his achievements, one by one, before getting to the point. "While it has been my intention to seek re-election," he wrote, "I believe it's in the best interest of my party and the country for me to stand down."
It struck me as like a little bit terse.
3 weeks back, right after the disastrous debate performance that landed Biden here, I talked to Slate contributor David Faris. So this weekend, I called him back up.
You know, he announced this on I could refuse to call it X. He announced this on Twitter in lieu of like a presidential address, which he does say is coming later this week. And a number of his aides and staff have leaked to the press that they were taken completely by surprise by this.
It felt a little bit like the Homer Simpson fading into the hedge meme for me.
Right. It was as brief a way to get out, to resign your candidacy as I could have imagined.
This announcement ended the weeks-long speculation about what the Democrats were going to do about a candidate who was tanking in the polls, bleeding donations, and presenting voters with a choice that seemed increasingly perilous come November. It was also the only move left to make.
Yeah, I think that things were getting increasingly divisive and ugly. The calls from the party leadership could not have been any clearer by this weekend, I think. But still, you had those reports on Saturday morning of, Biden is furious. He's furious at Obama. He's mad at everyone. He's not stepping aside. He's going to go back out and campaign.
And then you saw Joe Manchin come out and say Joe Biden should pull out, which was so interesting to me because for his whole presidency, there's been this joke, like, who's the real Joe in charge?
Yeah.
Because Joe Manchin was so pivotal in the Senate. And so it was so interesting to me that Manchin comes out and says, I really think that he should pull out of the race. And then within hours, you have Joe Biden actually doing just that.
Yeah, that was, I think it was a coincidence, but I think the sort of the drumbeat of people turning against him just was going on and on and on.
How do you feel when you heard the news?
I'll be honest, I haven't felt this relieved about anything since they announced that the vaccines were going to work.
Wow.
in the fall of 2020.
This is where I need to say, David is not a nonpartisan news source here. Since the moment Biden got off the debate stage back in June, he's been arguing that the president needed to exit the race. David even laid out how it could all go down.
So, yeah, I feel extraordinary relief. I feel excited about this election for the first time in the entire cycle. And I think it's a real opportunity for Democrats to turn it around. I mean, it's not going to be easy, but I think that we have a real shot now.
It's interesting. When I got the news, I was surprised that I felt sad a little bit. And I noticed if you put on cable news, the commentators immediately started doing a real, salute to Biden.
Look, politics is politics. But this is a human moment for one of the great humans in America. This is a huge moment for him, for his family, for all of us who love him, for all of us who...
You had Van Jones practically crying, talking about Biden's patriotism and heroism.
But if you're a young person watching this, this is leadership. This is patriotism.
And I looked at that and I both agreed with the sentiment a little bit, but I also thought, wow, this kind of lets Joe Biden off the hook here. Because we spent 3 weeks fighting about this, and we have no idea what happens now.
Right. I mean, he made the right decision eventually. Obviously, we would all be in a much better position had he done this a year ago, had he come to this realization a year ago. The polling has suggested that most Democrats wanted to see a different nominee for a long time, and yet everybody kind of went along with this until it became crystal clear that they could not do that.
Today on the show, Joe Biden is out of the running, and there's no roadmap for what happens now. I'm Mary Harris. You're listening to What Next? Stick around. This podcast is brought to you by Progressive Insurance. Let's face it, Sometimes multitasking can be overwhelming, like when your favorite podcast is playing and the person next to you is talking and your car fan is blasting, all while you're trying to find the perfect parking spot. But then again, sometimes multitasking is easy, like quoting with Progressive Insurance. They do the hard work of comparing rates so you can find a great rate that works for you, even if it's not with them. Give their nifty comparison tool a try, and you might just find getting the rate and coverage you deserve is easy. All you need to do is visit Progressive's website to get a quote with all the coverages you want, like comprehensive and collision coverage or personal injury protection. Then you'll see Progressive's direct rate, and their tool will provide options from other companies, all lined up and ready to compare, so it's simple to choose the rate and coverages you like. Press play on comparing auto rates. Quote at Progressive.com to join the over 29 million drivers who trust Progressive. Progressive Casualty Insurance Company and Affiliates. Comparison rates not available in all states or situations. Prices vary based on how you buy. This show is brought to you by Public. If you are looking for simple yet sophisticated investing, Public.com says click on over and check them out. From stocks to options, bonds to crypto, it is all there. You can even earn an industry-leading 5.1% APY on your cash. Public is trusted by millions of investors, and NerdWallet just gave Public 4.6 stars and calls it an impressive experience. Sign up in 2 minutes at Public.com. All your investing in one place. This is a paid advertisement for Public Investing, 5.1% APY as of June 17th, 2024, and is subject to change. NerdWallet overall rating 4.6 out of 5 as of May 2024. Full disclosures in the podcast description. Okay, let's go through what we know about Biden's decision here and how he made it. We have the letter he's released, plus some tweets he sent out. The thing I've noticed is that in his letter to the nation, explaining that he doesn't want to accept the party's nomination, Joe Biden doesn't say why he's making that decision. He's not saying, I don't feel like I can run, I don't feel like I can win, none of that. Is that meaningful?
I think it's an indication that he did not want to directly endorse the different critiques that were being made of him.
Like he doesn't want to say, I'm sick.
Right. He doesn't want to say, I'm sick. He doesn't want to say, I finally realized I'm too old to do this. I think for him to lay out a specific set of reasons about why he did this in this letter would have given too much satisfaction to the people who were trying to push him out. And, if we believe all of the sort of breathless press reporting around this, he and his family members, including Hunter Biden, were just extremely angry at the leading Democrats who were calling for him to step aside. I'm not surprised that he didn't say, America needs like a younger leader or something like that. I think to preserve his own sense of dignity and his own sense that he was doing this for his own reasons, I think they're going to remain opaque for the time being.
Yeah. Biden remains president. He said he wanted to fill out his term, but was nodding to Kamala Harris. I don't know. It's a choice that I think people will question. I think Mike Johnson already is. He's saying, well, if you can't run for office again, can you really be president?
Yeah, and I think that's where the letter lines up with the decision making, right? So the letter doesn't give a reason. And I think one of the reasons that it doesn't give a reason is that he did not want to provide any further, grist for the Republican rumor mill. Because if he had gone out in the letter and said, like, my friends, in the previous days, I've lost a step. I can't do a full campaign like a younger man, and I have finally come to agree with the critics that I'm too old to pursue this position. That's going to be in all the ads for like the next 4 months. Like Kamala Harris is serving someone who's not fit to be president.
Right, like you have a zombie president, essentially.
Yeah, you have a zombie president, and of course they're going to say that anyway, right? But like President Biden staying in office, right? Like doing events for Harris, performing the job of the president, going out and being like as competent as he's been since the debate, right? Which is not a super high bar to clear. But I think if we had not seen the debate, none of the performances after the debate would have been so bad to have resulted in this outcome.
Yeah, it was really the debate that brought us here.
The debate is what brought us here. And I think that this outcome in a lot of ways has been inevitable since like 10 minutes into that debate. Like even watching it, I was like, I simply do not see how we could possibly win an election with Joe Biden at the head of the party right now.
So Let's talk about what the process is now, because Joe Biden has endorsed Kamala Harris. You've seen a lot of Democrats get in line behind Kamala Harris, Bill and Hillary Clinton, Elizabeth Warren, lots of people here, but it's not clinched. And Kamala Harris seems to acknowledge that. She's released a statement saying she is running for the Democratic nomination, making it sound like, this isn't going to be a coronation for her. But we have just a few weeks before something like 4,000 delegates have to complete the nomination process. So how are they going to do that?
Well, that's a great question. And it's another reason why this is not the ideal way to have reached this outcome. I think the reality is, between President Biden's endorsement of her, the endorsements of a number of leading Democrats, and I think the feeling among the rank and file that, we need to get this settled, yesterday so that we can turn our attention to Donald Trump, I think that is going to create just irresistible momentum to making her the de facto nominee.
I mean, there was this moment last week that I'm sure you saw where Representative Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez did an hour-long Instagram Live where she really talked about the Democrats do not have a plan here.
Personally, people want to have this conversation 6 months ago, 8 months ago, a year ago. It's a very different landscape of logistics.
And that was one of the reasons why she was standing behind Joe Biden as the nominee. She said, listen, if he's not there, there's zero infrastructure in place for the Democrats to get in line. And it was worrisome to her because there's just simply so much that has to be done here.
There's some urgency. There's a number of dominoes that need to be put into place here, including like a serious vetting process for the people who are being considered for vice president. You hear the same 4 or 5 names, and the reality is they have to do a little bit of research on these people, right? They do not want a Sarah Palin situation on their hands, where you select someone and then in the 2 or 3 weeks following that, you just get hit with this devastating wave of negative press when people start digging around.
Yeah, you got to find their alts on Instagram now.
Right. What were they saying on Twitter in 2010? It's but to me, it's a very serious concern, right? A rushed process to the nomination means by necessity that you are going to have to skip some steps in ensuring the quality of your candidates.
We're doing it live, as we say in the biz.
Right.
If I'm a delegate for the Democratic National Convention and I got that job thinking I was going to a big political party reunion with all my friends, and now here I am, what's my life like now?
Well, my friend, you have just been invested with a lot more power than you imagined when you signed up for this gig, right? That's the expectation in the post-reform era after 1968. There's never really been any serious question about what would happen at the convention. You could squint and say 1980 with Carter and Kennedy.
Ted Kennedy.
Yeah. There was some question about whether they'd change the rules of the convention and elevate Kennedy. But, if you're a delegate, yeah, you think you're going to get rewarded for the hard work that you've put in as a member of the party faithful. Get some free drinks and go to dinner with some heavyweights and run around Chicago having a good time. And now suddenly it's I picked the nominee. And that's a big change. And I think that's one of the reasons for the coordinated campaign behind Harris.
Because they're signaling to all these people who are local party people, okay, this is what we're doing here, guys.
Exactly. I think that there'd be maybe some misperception among the public that when we say open convention, that the people who will be making the decision are senior Democrats or elected Democrats. But at least on the first ballot, Democrats in Congress have absolutely no role here whatsoever. This is up to those 3,900 something delegates to make this decision, right? When Biden has released them, technically they can do whatever they want. But I would point out that many, if not most of them, are Biden loyalists that the Biden campaign specifically approved as delegates in their states. And so to me, the odds of those loyal Biden delegates not basically just doing what Biden tells them to do is close to zero. I haven't looked at Twitter since we started doing this episode. I think the consolidation behind Harris is going to be very swift.
After the break, how Republicans are reacting to this news. This show is brought to you by Discover. Have you heard about Doublenomics? It's okay if you haven't. It's extremely niche and practiced by Discover. Here's an example. Discover automatically doubles the cash back earned on your credit card at the end of your first year with Cashback Match. That means with Discover, you could turn $150 cash back into $300. It pays to Discover. See terms at discover.com/credit card. This episode is brought to you by SAP. First, the bad news. SAP Business AI will not help you generate cubist versions of your family's holiday photos, but it will help you understand which supplier is best to help you roll out your plant-based packaging in Southeast Asia, or identify the training your junior project manager needs to rise up the ranks, or automate repetitive tasks while you focus on big innovations. So you can be ready for the next opportunity. Revolutionary technology, real-world results. That's SAP Business AI. Okay, so let's talk about what Republicans do now. I was just at the RNC, where Joe Biden was a huge target of so many speakers. Like Kimberly Guilfoyle, who's Donald Trump Jr.'s girlfriend, she was just especially biting.
Joe Biden cannot lead America. He cannot even lead himself off a stage.
It was hard to listen to. But with Biden off the ticket, are Republicans losing something, like someone to attack?
Yeah, I mean, they're losing their entire campaign strategy, which was just vaporized in the 30 seconds it takes to read Joe Biden's statement. They will pivot, right? I mean, you can see in Mike Johnson's statement that was put out today.
Yeah, Mike Johnson, Speaker of the House. Yeah.
Yeah, so Speaker Johnson's statement that effectively tarred Harris as the border czar of our porous southern border. I think immigration will be a major centerpiece of their campaign against Harris. They will try to knock her for not, speaking up about Biden's liabilities earlier. They will throw all the culture war stuff that they've been throwing at Democrats for years at her, thinking maybe it will actually be more effective with her. But I don't think that anybody should sugarcoat this. This is a disaster for Republicans. Right. At this point, they had the exact candidate that they wanted, and I think in some ways, maybe the only candidate that Donald Trump really could beat. And now they have a younger, more vigorous person who's the vice president of the United States, who's a pretty dynamic public presence. Trump must just be in an absolute state of panic about the September 10th debate.
Yeah, I was struck by last week. A speech Kamala Harris gave, I believe in North Carolina, began making the rounds. And she was really good in it. She looked better than she had when she ran in 2020, frankly. And she was just prosecuting the case against Donald Trump very clearly. She was like, they're saying they're the unity party.
You cannot claim you stand for unity if you are pushing an agenda that deprives whole groups of Americans of basic freedoms, opportunity, and dignity.
And I was like, okay. She's really interestingly doing the work while not saying I'm running, being loyal to Joe Biden, all those things. But it was an interesting example of this race is going to sound really different now.
What I'll say is yes, I mean, we all remember her campaign for president in 2019 kind of flaming out. But you know who else has gotten better in their second run for president? Literally everyone. Outside of Barack Obama, right? Richard Nixon, Joe Biden himself, right? John McCain, Mitt Romney.
You learn from your mistakes.
You learn from your mistakes. And she is a national figure, right? I mean, I think this has been a little bit undersold by folks who were seeking an open convention. And I was kind of agnostic on this. I didn't have super strong opinions, but she's the vice president of the United States. She's a tested national figure. And maybe she is not who would end up with the nomination in a truly open process that began last summer. But from what I have seen and heard over the last month, and I think people have basically just been ignoring her for 3 years, from what I've seen and heard over the last month, she's going to be a really formidable candidate. I think that the Democratic Party leader has been elderly for so long that like people have forgotten what it's like to have the party's standard bearer be like an articulate, dynamic presence who can do 6 events a day and capably defend the administration's record.
One thing I want to make sure we talk about is that we're going to have lawsuits about whatever the Democrats do now. Like, you see Speaker of the House Mike Johnson saying, like, essentially, get ready. We have lawsuits ready to go because you're disenfranchising millions of people who voted for Biden. Do you think that approach has any merit?
No. There's no conceivable basis on which look, maybe they can run something through the Fifth Circuit, right? But
right. I mean, like our own Mark Joseph Stern tweeted out, like, it's basically really easy to imagine Republicans going to Judge Matthew Kaczmarek in Texas, who's the same person who's put through a whole bunch of things that the Supreme Court has slapped down, and having him just draft a nationwide injunction forcing Biden to remain on the ballot in all 50 states.
Yeah, the problem with that is that Joe Biden is not on any ballots right now, right? Like the Democrats have not nominated him yet, right? And the party has internal rules about the release of delegates should the person who had won the majority of them decide that they don't want the nomination. The reality is the Democratic Party is a private organization. I don't doubt that someone will file a lawsuit, but I do think that it will go nowhere.
I mean, there is Democratic bitterness here, though, that could fuel the idea of lawsuits here. Like, you saw senators like John Fetterman come forward and say, you know, it's unfair that Joe Biden's being pushed out. You saw Representative AOC talk about the same sort of thing, basically like this is Democratic leadership and donors pushing Joe Biden out, not voters. You know, that's not what people are concerned about. They're concerned about people with the deep pockets. I guess the time for that kind of speculation is done because the decision is made. But it's like there are those embers burning, you know?
Sure. I mean, there is going to be some fires to put out here. I find the idea that this is anti-democratic and like anti-small d democratic to be a little bit tendentious because we did not have a meaningful choice in this primary unless you count Marianne Williamson or Dean Phillips, the representative from Minnesota, who really ran this protest campaign after failing to recruit someone bigger to run against Biden. And they weren't even on all the ballots. So in no sense did Democratic primary voters ever have a real choice here. And so I just don't think that we've disenfranchised all the primary voters is going to carry a lot of water, given the public opinion polling that we see, where most surveys, I think, show a majority of Democrats wanted Biden to step aside. You have like a super majority of the country wanted Joe Biden to step aside. And so, of course, like Harris will have some work to do, sort of massaging some of those hurt feelings and that resentment. But I think that Harris is a talented enough politician that she will be able to mend those fences as they have always been mended after a bitter primary.
So Joe Biden himself is expected to address the nation later in the week. What are you expecting from that speech?
I think that what he's going to do is almost like a convention speech for Harris. You know, I think that he will talk about his service to the country. I think that he will say positive things about his administration and its accomplishments. He will probably acknowledge that this was a really difficult decision. And then I think he's going to pivot into a kind of a booster speech for his vice president, knowing what's on the line right now in November and having made this really hard decision to step away from the race. That means that Biden knows the stakes are enormous. And I think that it's not often that you're going to get this many eyeballs glued to a TV, not even at the convention, honestly. This is going to be a hugely watched and hugely talked about speech. And I would expect him to use a significant part of that speech to make the case for why voters, not just the delegates, but why voters should get behind Kamala Harris and work together to stop the catastrophe of a second Trump term.
You know, this news is so massive, really unprecedented, that a presidential candidate would withdraw this late in the game. My concern, and I sense it's a little bit of your concern too, is that it's going to totally eclipse how he got to this point, which is that the Democratic Party made a decision after the midterms in 2022. It's Biden. He's got this on lock. We will not tolerate any kind of open process or competition for him. And the result was that they ran with someone who everyone knew was very old and was showing signs of his age. Do you think Democrats are going to make the time and space to reflect on that and what it means?
I think that they will reflect on this. I think the degree to which they reflect on it is going to depend on what happens in November. If Kamala Harris wins the election, then all of the blow-by-blow of how we got to this point, I think will fade away.
Yeah, all is forgiven when you're a winner.
Exactly. It's like you're going to a winner's party, you don't want to argue. And I think that'll smooth over a lot of the ruffled feathers. If Kamala Harris loses the election, which is entirely possible, I think that is when Democrats might ask themselves some much tougher questions about the structure of the party that I personally think that they should be asking either way. Right? One of those questions to me is like, is it really a good idea to have the incumbent president take over the national party apparatus, as has been the case for a long time? In other words, how do you stop a train that is like rolling down the tracks towards a collision if both the train and the operator are like walking in lockstep towards that decision? And I think having loyalists of the president running the Democratic Party nationally is not a good idea. I think that the party needs to have a presence, an ideology, and an esprit de corps like that is separate from the president, that is separate from the party nominee. And that's where I would identify the hinge point here, right? And that is when you have loyalists up and down the national party apparatus, there is no one to say no to the president when the president is making a catastrophic mistake. And that I think is what happened here. And I think that there's a lot to be learned from what happened over the past year, whether Harris wins or loses. But I'll be honest, I don't think that we're going to have that conversation in a serious way if she wins.
David, I'm really grateful for your time. Thanks for coming on the show.
Thanks for having me, Mary.
David Faris is a politics professor at Roosevelt University. He's also a contributing writer for Slate. And that's our show. If you're a fan of What Next, the best way to support us is to join Slate Plus. Going over to slate.com/whatnextplus to sign up. What Next is produced by Paige, Osburn, Elena, Schwartz, Rob Gunther, Anna Phillips, and Madeline Ducharme. We are led by Alicia Montgomery, with a little boost from Susan Matthews. Ben Richmond is the Senior Director of Podcast Operations here at Slate. And I'm Mary Harris. Thanks for listening. Talk to you soon.
Be warned that once you pick up a refreshingly cold drink from McDonald's and people see just how refreshingly cold that drink from McDonald's is, you may create drink envy. Because there are drinks, then there are drinks from McDonald's.
For a morning brew that really creates a stir, get any size iced coffee, including caramel and French vanilla, for just 99 cents before 11 a.m. Price and participation may vary, cannot be combined with any other offer or combo meal.
Ba-da-ba-ba-ba.